Let's move to our next presentation by Balaji Raghunathan, who is the Vice President Technology and Solution with Digital Experience with ITC Infotech. To give you a background, Mr. Balaji has more than 24 years of global experience in the IT industry with a focus on digital transformation, cloud technologies, data and AI. He is the inventor of 2 patents granted by the US Patent Office and has authored book on data anonymization, digital transformation and information privacy. Can we welcome Balaji with big round of applause, please?
I hope you can hear me. Okay, yeah, thank you. So I largely have been working with the IT organizations, and while I have some of the BPOs as my customers, but yeah, to a BPO audience, this is the first time I'm talking. Charan talked a lot about enterprise risk management. Now, I'll be speaking about data security and privacy, but all these are interlinked. So without enterprise risk management, you cannot talk about cyber security. Without cyber security, you cannot talk about data security. Without data security, you cannot talk about data privacy. So essentially, if we look at the statistics, a lot of these would have been shared by Mr. Gurcharan, right? If you look at what happened between 2020 and 21, that's the impact of COVID. The number of data breaches have actually doubled. This is just taking US into picture, right? The number of data breaches have actually doubled just between 2020 and 2021. And if you look at the 2022 statistics, it's going to be almost similar. The half yearly is about half of whatever is 2021's data breaches. So if you just look at the statistics, there is a cyber attack happening every 39 seconds, right? And 95% of these are because of human errors. So if this actually looks alarming, right, what we are actually saying is that only 5% of the company's files and folders are actually protected, right? So we are talking about 30,000 websites being hacked today. What this means is that most likely your company's website might have been hacked, but you just don't know about it, right? So, and we don't know where the attack is actually coming from. Now, if we look at the cost of the data breach, right? I mean, if we actually look at what it is today, it is about, for every data breach, the cost of servicing the data breach or the impact of a data breach is actually 4.35 million USD. So that's the cost of every data breach. That's average cost rather. Now if you look at what are all the data types of data compromise, that is more about the PII aspect. That's personally identifiable information, and the the personal health information. So a lot of times people I don't want to say confuse, but mix up data security and data privacy, right? So privacy is largely about your personal information, and if we see most of the data breaches, they are about accessing your personal information for the needs which are mostly harmful, right? So if you look at the type of data breaches, you see your social security number, that's the US social security number, and yeah, the date of birth. Then we can also see that your personal health information, that is actually in the top 5. So essentially if you look at a data breach perspective, while there is security, there is harmful motivation, it's more the personal information which people are after. Now, why has this increased, right? And what are the types of data breaches? So again, this is an interesting statistic, right? Like 43% of your data breach are actually from internal sources. And out of that internal sources, right, like your intentional ones is almost near to your non-intentional ones, right? So that's essentially most of your privacy attacks are largely going to be internal, while your data security attacks can be external or internal. So now why is this happening? Like we have talked a lot about the remote workforce and all that, but essentially if we look at what has changed post-COVID, it is the workforce and the workplace. So you can work from anywhere, so that's the work from home aspect that has actually increased the number of data breaches. Now your type of data breaches can be because you got a mail saying that we are introducing an additional bonus for you, click on this link, give your confidential information away. So that is what is phishing, right? So basically looking at the user's vulnerability and motivating them to click. So that has caused a lot of issues. Then if we look at, people have been talking about bring your own device for the last 10 years, but still we are not still comfortable from a BYOD access perspective. So access from mobile devices, that is one of the other key issues from a data breach perspective. Of course, like there is a lot of ransomware happening. Ransomware is quite interesting because like you don't know if somebody demands money, or cryptos. You don't know whether you should pay or you should not pay, right? Because it's all about how much time you have. So how do you know what is legal? How do you know, how do you inform authorities? How do you treat ransomware attacks? Should you announce it to the market? Will that impact your stock price? I think all that is an important aspect when you look at data breach. So now that your workforce, workplace, everything have changed, what should be the strategic change from a data security or data privacy protection perspective, right? So far we were looking at a walled scenario. People are going to come to your office, your perimeter of attack is going to be probably only your office, your workplace is one particular location. So you put up VPNs, you put up firewalls, and you protect yourself against a breach. That was basically the strategy used. That's a perimeter security. Now for today's hybrid workforce, hybrid workplace world and hybrid work world, right? You have a mix of contractors, you have a mix of gig workers, you have a mix of employees, all this put together. How do you handle security? So that's where the zero trust architecture comes into picture. I think Mr. Gucharan also talked about it. What is zero trust? So basically it is about not trusting any user, not trusting any device. So that's what is the first principle. That's basically zero trust security. You don't bother about who's the user, you always want that user to be validated. You don't bother about which device it is, you still ask the user to actually authenticate. Second one is basically, this admin accounts in a particular database or a system that would have caused most of the havoc when it comes to cyber security or data breach. So essentially your admin account is your highest privilege what you can give. Now what you need to ensure is that you give the lowest privilege, you give the least privilege with which a user can actually perform their work. So essentially the second principle is about implementing the least privilege. This is a third one, right? So far, and that's how even Amazon works. For example, you don't try to get anything 100% accurate. You get about 80% accurate, and then the remaining 20% you know how to handle if there is an inaccuracy, right? So essentially you have to assume that there will be breach. You have to actually assume that at any point of time you should be able to respond to a breach. You should know how should you communicate to market? How would you detect where is the breach? You should be able to, localize your attack zone. So that's where that assume breach principle comes into picture. So essentially, people talk about two types of organization in this world. The one who knows that they have been breached. Second is the ones who don't know that they have been breached. But increasingly, you are seeing the third ones. They are the cunning ones, right? They know that they have been breached, but they don't show that they have been breached. So how do you actually know that your data is safe? And when actually companies give to BPOs, would they be willing to trust you? In which category they are going to actually put you into, right? So now we'll go through the people, process, and the technology aspect of how do you look at zero trust security, right? Especially from a data perspective. The first thing what needs to be done is you have to look at, what is the business you are into or your customer is into. So what regulations bind them? So whether it is 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗏 or it is GDPR or it could be any other regulation, right? So largely privacy is all about how do you comply with regulations. So now when we look at the business drivers, when we look at protecting the assets, the data assets, we need to know, how will it how will it impact your regulatory compliance? How will it impact your customers' regulatory compliance? So essentially, that's the first aspect. So you have to look at the regulatory compliance aspect. You have to look at the business in which you're in, the regulations which your business is bound by. That's the first part. Second is what we call as the sensitivity analysis. Not all data is sensitive. So you can have different levels of sensitivity. The personal data can also be shared. There are personal data or there could be enterprise data which is more competitive, that is more an internal kind of classification, that's internal circulation only. Then there is actually secretive data which you don't want anybody to access. So it can be confidential or you can even make some data highly confidential. So for each of this kind of data, so you look at how sensitive is this data, you look at classifying this data, and then you look at how will you treat each type of this data, right? So your internal data should not go out of, people outside your domain. Maybe that's a policy what you have, but your secretive data should not be accessible to anybody. So you may have to encrypt it or you may have to mask it. So that's basically your, your policy. So you start with your business drivers, you come to your regulatory aspect, then you look at, what is your sensitive data, where is your sensitive data, then you look at how do you classify your data and sensitive data, and then you can actually look at how do you control access to your particular sensitive data. Then finally, we come to, when you look at controls, it could be a mix of, manual controls and it could be automated controls. So when we look at control, it could be, you want your employees to access the data only from your system, and that system is basically locked down. That could be one control. So you can have a number of controls like that. But apart from that, the most important thing is actually how do you handle incident management. So you need to have an integrated response. You need to know what you need to communicate to the market. So marketing communications is very, very important. And then essentially it's all about preparation. So every time you should be prepared for an attack. It may happen anytime. So a lot of times backups are taken, but only after an incident occurs that your restore is actually not working. So you need to ensure the readiness to handle a breach. So that's what is the most important principle of zero trust security. Now we come to the technology aspect. For handling your data protection, your data security, you need some specific capabilities. It could be your encryption, it could be your public key infrastructure. It could be essentially, how do you discover data, label data, classify data, label content. It could be your whole data governance, what is the structure, who has access to what kind of data, who can change data, whether you have an audit log, and then whether, how do you protect your security of your files or your database. So now, what tools should you use? There are about 1200 tools from a cyber security perspective. If you just look at just the data security aspect, right, it is more than 120. So that's where your zero trust reference architecture comes into picture, right. So essentially, when you look at zero trust reference architecture, you look at a concept called adaptive access. So earlier what used to happen was, like, every user will be given access to some particular system irrespective of what device you are accessing it, and it may not even involve what type of data it is, how sensitive is the data, how sensitive is that content. So now we have this concept of adaptive access. So essentially what we try to do is dynamically fed by your artificial intelligence, your threat intelligence, you look at what is the risk profile of your user, you look at what is the risk profile of your device, you look at the location of your device, then you look at basically scoring the user's risk and then give access. So for the same user, if they access from a public VPN, they may actually have lower levels of access to that particular data or content. Yeah. But if they access from a secure network, you may give higher level of access. So that's what is adaptive access. So that is the key from a zero trust security architecture perspective. So essentially you look at who is the user accessing. It could be even your bots. Should bots be given the same level of access as a human? So I think that's a policy you need to make. So runtime, real-time policy making fed by your analytics, that will actually give adaptive access. So that is basically the overall concept from a zero trust security architecture perspective. So let's summarize, right? Technology is in abundance. How the best practices are all around technology, around your organization. So you saw that 1200 plus tools. You can use the right tool for you, but most people think that cyber security protection or data protection is all about just implementing a tool and that's it. But it's the organization, it's a culture. So basically, you need to have a zero tolerance policy for any violations or any compliance issues, right? That's the first part. Second is the workforce regulation. You might want to have NDAs with your employees or with your contractors. Then third is you need to showcase to your customer that you're the best in terms of protection of your data. So the audit process, your ISO process, all this comes into picture. You need to do that regularly. Third is being prepared. I think this I talked about quite a lot. You need to, but what is necessary is an integrated response management, right? So essentially, you need to have your legal team, you need to have your marketing team, along with your IT and your business team working together, so that you can reduce the timeline for your response and you can reduce the impact to your shares in the market or your customers' shares in the market. And lastly, it's about what is the policy you want to impose. So it could be a strict lockdown. What is the kind of lockdown devices, lockdown of devices you want to give to your employees, and then how do you do physical security controls, how do you do your IT security controls, all that comes into picture. That's what I wanted to tell. Hope this resonates with what your organization actually faced today. Thank you.